It is Thursday, April 26, 2018, and this is 3000 NFL Mock Draft / Seahawks Chats with Kenneth Arthur, and I'm joined by Rob Staten of SeahawksDraftBlog.com once again as we're discussing the NFL Draft. And today I'm going to surprise everyone and get right into it. So the Seahawks select running back Rashaad Penny out of San Diego State, 27th overall. This comes after the Seahawks moved down from pick 18 to pick 27 with a trade from the Green Bay Packers, the first time John Schneider has ever traded with his old organization. And he moves down from 18 to 27, and they pick up a third-round pick in the process, getting them back into day two, as well as swapping out their seventh-round pick for a sixth-round pick. So the Seahawks make a move, get a day two pick, and add a running back. We've had a lot of discussion about taking running backs in the first round, and we can get to that. But just in terms of Rashaad Penny, Rob, right off the top of the bat, which is a phrase that I believe is real now, what do you think of the Seahawks selecting Rashaad Penny?
Well, I thought there was eight running backs that probably could have gone in the top 60 picks, possibly even the top 50, and Penny was one of those. He was always in the top 50 whenever did any rankings during the season, going back to the mid-season, would always put him amongst the top 50 players in this draft. Personally, I didn't think that he was above the likes of Ronald Jones II, my second favorite running back after Saquon Barkley. Didn't think he was going to go above the likes of Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, perhaps not even Darius Geis, but I think as we can see, he's falling a bit, and the reasons are obvious with that. And I thought that he was probably in a similar range to someone like Royce Freeman at Oregon. So that's how I was viewing him. I didn't expect to see him go as early as this, number 27 overall. Thought he would probably go around 40 to 45. And maybe the Seahawks wanted to trade back one more time and take Penny. You know, they'd already traded back from 18 to 27. They may have wanted to trade back again into the second round. And I think that unless you're of the opinion, as I assume you are, Kenny, and other people are on Seahawks Twitter, that you just don't take a running back early at all costs. If you are more willing to accept that as a proposition, then I think if they'd have taken him at 35, for example, a lot of people could have got on board with it, especially when they go and watch the YouTube videos that are out there. And Rashaad Penny, go and watch him against Stanford. Go and watch his record-breaking number of special teams touchdowns. Go and watch the way that he runs with physicality and speed and can get outside. Go and watch him play the way that he did in the Senior Bowl and some of the things that he showed in the game there at Mobile. People will get on board with this. And personally, I like the statement that it makes. Again, I'm sure, as you mentioned, that we're going to come on to the value of taking running backs early, but I kind of felt like the Seahawks needed to make a statement to try and fix their running game. It's been a mess for 2 years. It's integral to their identity. They need to repair this. And whether it was an offensive lineman, whether it was a tight end who can block really well, or whether it was a running back, I think they needed to do something to try and fix that running game. And if they had waited on the position, you'd have been looking at someone like Kalen Ballage with that third-round pick possibly being there, possibly not guaranteed. You'd maybe be looking at someone who'd fallen a little bit there, whether Royce Freeman would drop there. We're going to have to wait and see what happens with Darius Geis. But you're hoping that happens. And if they didn't take something to help fix the run with this pick at 27, then they ran the risk of missing out completely. And I would always back Pete Carroll and John Schneider to find defensive talent on day three. We'll have to wait and see whether Earl Thomas is traded and whether that will get them one or two more picks tomorrow in the second and third round. Possibly it will, and that will help them go and get after some defensive players here. I still think they might go after a tight end as well. But generally speaking, I like Penny. I think it's a bit of a reach in terms of where he should have gone in terms of draft value, but I like the statement that it makes about trying to fix the running game.
I want to clarify a point there that you bring up, which is, in terms of draft value, you clarify that this is where a lot of people didn't expect him to go, or at least for you personally, in your own big board, would not have gone in the top 30 in the first round or something like that. Maybe more in terms of his talent and his value, and putting all those things together, he's 40 to 45. But when people actually say like, well, they could have got him in the second round, can you clarify maybe that's not necessarily the case, because he went here, and if he didn't go to the Seahawks, maybe he would have gone to the Patriots. He took Sony Michel at 31, or Sony Michael at 31. So when you say that he went a bit earlier than you may have liked, or at least, what can you clarify what you mean, and not necessarily that he would have been available?
No, what I mean is that in my mock draft, the one that I sent for scoring for the Huddle Report, for example, I had him in the second round to Indianapolis, which was pick number 49. And I kind of felt that he was going to go in the top 50. It was just, where was he going to go? I could have easily have seen him going to Denver at 40, for example. I think they're going to have to look for a running back at some point there. Indianapolis pick at 36, 37. Could have imagined them taking him in that range as well. And Cleveland, having taken a cornerback with their second pick in the first round, could have looked to add a running back at the top of the second round as well. They have picks 33 and 35. They could have taken an offensive lineman and taken a running back in that position there too. So I always felt that he was going to go in probably the 40s, but possibly in the 30s. And that's what I mean by that. I don't think it's, there may be people out there who sort of assumed that Rashaad Penny was going to go in the third round, for example, and the Seahawks, hugely reached on this player. For me, he was always a top 50 player. And taking him at 27 is a bit of a reach, but it's a bit of a reach based on the mock draft that I've been putting out for the last few weeks. That's what I mean by that. And quite frankly, the Seahawks had the pick of the bunch for the running backs. They could have taken Ronald Jones. They could have taken Nick Chubb. They could have taken Sony Michel or Geis or Freeman or whoever else. And they chose this guy. And I'm not somebody who just blindly follows what the Seahawks do, but I'm prepared to give Rashaad Penny a chance now. I like the statement that this made. We are going to try and fix the run. Other people might not value the running game as much these days. Teams clearly see it as not quite as important as perhaps they used to do in the NFL. But the Seahawks have a different opinion. They want to run the ball. They want to run the ball as a point of emphasis for their team. And I like this statement that we are going to try and fix that. And we're going to do it by drafting Rashaad Penny with the first pick.
Let's talk about style. Rashaad Penny leading the nation in rushing yards last season with San Diego State, and per Pro Football Focus, leading the nation in broken tackles with roughly 80. Those are a stat that can be debated a little bit, but leading the nation with 80 of those. And when you look back at the types of running backs that have worked for the Seattle Seahawks, Marshawn Lynch, of course, always leading the NFL in broken tackles and missed tackles forced. And then when they moved into Thomas Rawls, when he was successful, he was forcing missed tackles. And then in his short stint last year, Chris Carson was one of the best in the NFL at forcing missed tackles. And that's something that Rashaad Penny seems to have excelled at San Diego State. But when you look at something like that too, when you look at San Diego State and the competition that they face, or the style of football that they run, and the fact that Donnell Pumphrey was, one of the most prolific players in college football history for the 3-4 years with and prior to Rashaad Penny's run at San Diego State. Can you talk a little bit about the running style for Rashaad Penny and sort of where he has his flaws?
One of his flaws is that he's an upright runner. So people may have heard that complaint with Kerryon Johnson, that basically what that means is that you provide quite a big target to be hit, and it can lead to injuries sometimes. And Kerryon Johnson has certainly had that issue in his college career, and we saw that with the injury picked up in the Iron Bowl, which affected him for the rest of the year. So if you're an upright runner, you're going to get more hits. That can be a problem. I thought that he had a little bit of an issue sometimes. I can remember there was one run, I think it was Leighton Vander Esch who was defending it. He can try and get outside a little too often, and Vander Esch, just like a heat-seeking missile, just tracked him down, hammered him for a tackle for a loss. I think that he runs with power and physicality. He's a prototype runner when you look at him in terms of his size, his explosive testing, 10-foot broad jump, his 32.5-inch vertical, explosive enough, the kind of back that the Seahawks like. Seems like a really cool guy. His reaction to being drafted by the Seahawks just melts your heart, really, the way that. But, I just wonder about the level of competition as well. And they had, in the past, a running back there who, in Donnell Pumphrey, who was something ridiculous, like 180 pounds or like wet through. And to not be ahead of somebody like that, as productive as Pumphrey was, would be sort of a little bit of a concern there. Why wasn't Penny a 3-year starter at San Diego State? That said, Pumphrey was very valuable for San Diego State. Penny stepped up to the plate and had a really strong, productive year. He's broken records for special teams production. Some of the plays that he made on special teams, not just as a return man, but as a blocker, are very impressive. And if people want to see him at his best against a tough opponent, he practically won the game for his team against Stanford during the 2017 season. So they beat Stanford at home. It was a back and forth type of game. They won it late on, and he was the deciding factor in that game. And that's a tough team to run against. They've got good defensive linemen. They always have at Stanford. They're a tough physical running team, and Penny essentially won them the game. So if people want to go and see Penny at his best against a tough opponent, go and search for his game on YouTube against Stanford last season.
And a tweet from Scott Barrett at Scott Barrett DFB saying that Penny in his career against Power 5 schools had 65 carries for 506 yards, an average of 7.78 yards per carry, which is in line with what his yards per carry was over the last 2 seasons, around 7.8. So he did have rate, success against Power 5 schools, albeit 65 rushes against Power 5 schools, not that many total. So there is that to factor in. And for the Seattle Seahawks, they've got Chris Carson, they've got CJ Procise. Now they've got Rashaad Penny, and, they wouldn't draft Penny 27th overall. I mean, this is extraordinarily high to draft a running back. Anyone can disagree with me on whether or not you should take a running back in the first round, but the NFL has dictated over the last 5 years that anyone going in the first round must be an extremely special player. Only 5 of them have done it, and all of them were in the top 15 in these recent drafts. So, for Penny to get in at 27 and be the second back off the board, you could look at the same thing with CJ Procise, because even though he went in the 3rd round, he was still one of the first running backs off the board. So in the class, for the Seahawks, they've believed that Rashaad Penny was the second best running back in this class, and some people have argued that he's a better running back prospect than Saquon Barkley, and some have put up there, and that's Phil Savage. Reese just tweeted out that he was his favorite running back in the draft. PFF has, some people have said that he was their favorite running back in the draft, and now he's a part of the Seattle Seahawks and certainly looks to be the starter there. And we know that he's going to maybe play some special teams. Some of the stuff that Pete Carroll and John Schneider have said just now, prior to this being recorded and maybe during it, with regards to Rashaad Penny. How do you see him fitting in with Seattle Seahawks in his rookie season?
Well, obviously, they're going to rely on him to try and help fix the running game, and they want to see some production there. They want to see this guy putting up the major numbers, and they've got a rotation now that they can work with Penny, with Chris Carson, with Mike Davis. They can really try and go after this running game. I think Brian Schottenheimer in the past has used multiple running backs. I think we'll probably see that again. I think there's going to be some competition there. They're going to, he may not necessarily start. They may bring him into camp and let him compete with Carson and Davis and see who ends up being the front runner from that. I mean, that's entirely possible as well. He might not start the year as the lead number 1 running back. I mean, that's just a possibility. I think what this says, and this is kind of the thing that I've been arguing on the blog for most of the season, is that however the rest of the league do things, this is a team that when the rest of the league was looking for small cornerbacks and would draft them early, the Seahawks found long cornerbacks that fit their scheme and took them on the 3rd day of the draft and turned a defense built on practically rejects into the best defense in the NFL. They were the ones that had the foresight to do that. They were the ones who, when the rest of the league was looking at Aaron Rodgers and Ben Roethlisberger shooting it out in a Super Bowl behind bad offensive lines, just throwing it all over the field, they were the ones who wanted to play old school football and play tough defense and had Marshawn Lynch and ran the ball down your throat and then got a quarterback who could run as well. And, that was the way that they built this team. And they don't care what the rest of the league thinks. They don't care what the trends are. They don't care whether, this running back's now going to earn X amount or the 7th best paid running back in the league. They're going to do things their way. And they're going to do that every single year. They did when they drafted Bruce Irvin. They did when they took Russell Wilson. They just have this way of doing things. And more power to the Seahawks for doing that. I don't want to follow a team that just, like a sheep, follows everybody else, what everybody else is doing in the league. I want to be the team that sets the tone, that everybody else copies. And that's what Pete Carroll and John Schneider started with this whole thing back in 2010. The whole league copied their way of doing things on defense, copied their scheme, copied their cornerbacks, copied their style of doing the things. And I want this team to be unique, to have their own ideas, to be original. And I'll go with it. And I want to see this team running the ball again. I want to see them committing to that and being able to go on the road and say, we're going to run the ball and you're going to have to stop us. And I want to see Russell Wilson get that support. I mean, he's lost 10 touchdowns from Jimmy Graham. He's lost all the production from Paul Richardson. And they had no production from the running game. Go and help out your quarterback. Get a running game. Let's get some guys now, some weapons around this guy, and then do what they've done for years, which is find players on defense, that can build around this thing. And the chances are, Kenny, that maybe it'll happen in the next 10 minutes, or maybe it'll happen while we're doing this podcast, that they'll trade Earl Thomas. If not, maybe it will happen at some point tomorrow, that he will go and they'll get some more picks, and they'll be able to build up this new look defense that people want to see as well. But I just like what this statement says. It says we are committed to the running game. We are going to try and fix it. And I'm telling you, if the Seahawks can fix their running game and get some production from the position next season, with Russell Wilson as the quarterback, this team will be tough to beat. They might not be the Super Bowl favorites. They might not win the Super Bowl. They might not win the NFC West, but they'll be a tough out at home or on the road, but they've got to be able to run the ball.
Yeah. And they pick Penny 27th overall, but that's not where they began the day. They were 18th overall, and the Green Bay Packers made a deal to move up from 27 to pick 18. And with that, the Packers selected, and listen, if you've ever heard me do a podcast or ever heard me speak at all, you know that I'm not good at saying names or words. So bear with me. The Packers select Jair Alexander, 18th. Leighton Vander Esch went 19th. Frank Ragnow went 20th. Billy Price went 21st. Rashawn Evans went 22nd. Isaiah Wynn went 23rd. DJ Moore went 24th. Hayden Hurst went 25th. And Calvin Ridley went 26th. The Seattle Seahawks missed out on all those players to move down. John Schneider saying he wasn't sure if he was going to get a trade partner at 18, and then finally went with the Packers. And then he said that they did have options to trade down from 27, but opted to stay and select Penny. Rob, I've read you off those 9 names. Any of them stand out to you as big names to for the Seahawks to let slide by, regardless of the pickups that they got in the trade? Any of those names stand out to you as guys that you wouldn't have wanted to see get by the Seahawks?
I can honestly say there was nobody that I regretted seeing come off the board in this whole first round. I mean, apart from, I love the Vita Vea pick. I love what Tampa Bay did there, trading down, getting 2 second-round picks and taking Vita Vea. Love that pick for Tampa Bay, but never expected Vita Vea to be there for the Seahawks anyway at number 18. So was not particularly disappointed when that happened. And then when I look at the players that went off the board just before Seattle picked, so just to run through them again, didn't really expect them to draft Colton Miller, for example. Didn't think they were going to go in that direction. Really liked Tremaine Edmonds, really liked him. But again, I thought they were going to trade down at 18 anyway. Don't think they're a linebacker away from getting to where they want to be. Derwin James felt he was overrated. Really liked Leighton Vander Esch, but there are some injury concerns there. A lot of teams took him off the board, or sorry, a handful of teams took him off the board. We'll never know whether the Seahawks are one of those. Ragnow and Price, they've got a center. Rashawn Evans really like, but again, I just don't really see where the fit is there in Seattle. Love Isaiah Wynn. Would have been very happy to have seen him in the Seahawks, and I think that's a fantastic pick for the New England Patriots there. Love what Isaiah Wynn brings to the table. Not envious of DJ Moore. Nick Nelson completely shut him down, the Wisconsin cornerback. He didn't make a catch in that game against Wisconsin, and that's stuck in my memory there. Hayden Hurst going to be a 25-year-old tight end. Tough, physical, like the way he plays, but not exactly envious of Baltimore for that one. And Calvin Ridley made plays for Alabama, but there's no one striking feature. He's not big. He's not fast. He's not physical. He was just reasonably productive for Alabama. And he will be a nice compliment to Julio Jones and Mohamed Sanu. But for me, the Falcons there it was more of a best player available type of pick, obviously, on their board, as opposed to really fixing their biggest need. They didn't really do anything to the defensive line.
Yeah, and the Seahawks select Rashaad Penny, Terrell Edmonds, Taven Bryan, Mike Hughes, Sony Michel, and then Lamar Jackson finally goes off at 32, which makes sense for a team to go up and get a quarterback with a 5th-year option. So Baltimore went up and got Lamar Jackson. There was obviously some talk about would the Seahawks make a big move with a quarterback, and they haven't done it at this point, but maybe in the following picks that they have. It wouldn't be a big move necessarily, but they could make a move for a quarterback. Rob, when looking at the picks that went off after Rashaad Penny and the ones that are still on the board, anyone there, because the Seahawks are not likely, unless they trade a 1st or 2nd round pick in 2019, or they can't trade their 2nd round pick. So unless they trade a 1st round pick in 2019, they're not going to be selecting in the 2nd round probably. So for the players that are still on the board, anyone excite you in general?
Oh yeah, there's loads of players that still I think have got tremendous value there. I'm going to ignore the running backs because they've taken one already. They're not going to take Ronald Jones the second or Nick Chubb now, you presume. So really like Isaiah Oliver. He's still on the board, cornerback from Colorado. Would be a great get for the Seahawks if they could get him at some point. Don't think it's likely. I think he's going to go in the first few picks of the second round. Same feeling with Austin Corbett. Love him as a left tackle who's going to move inside. Really, really tenacious, solid blocker there. Just didn't get beat as a left tackle at Nevada, so really like what he brings. Christian Kirk, the wide receiver at Texas A&M, great attitude, big playability. He had 33 touchdowns in his college career, which is no mean feat in the SEC. And obviously some of the defensive linemen there that are going to go off the board eventually. So the likes of Josh Sweat, Sam Hubbard, Kamoka Ture are still there. So there's lots of players in the second round to like. I personally was never a big fan of Harold Landry. I know a lot of people thought the Seahawks were going to draft him. And then I imagine there's quite a large number of the fan base who when the Rashaad Penny pick was called, were like, why have they not taken Harold Landry? But he's a bit of a one-trick pony. Didn't have the most amazing combine in terms of that burst and quickness there. He had a 1.59 split, which is in the 1.5s in fairness, but it's not in the Bruce Irvin, Cliff Averill type of range. And I just always felt that he was a little bit of a mirage there. Not surprised that he hasn't got in the first round, but he will go quite quickly there. And there's other defensive linemen too that you can mention. And one or two of the safeties too. Terrell Edmonds goes in the back end of the first round, but the likes of Justin Reed and Jesse Bates are still there too, and Ronnie Harrison. So there's a ton of talent. I mean, the value and the strength of this draft is going to come in rounds 2 and 3. I mean, the teams that were able to trade down and get extra picks there, Tampa Bay, for example, are going to pick 3 times tomorrow in the second round, having already brought in Vita Vea. If you are a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan right now and you are not dancing around your front room, you need to start doing that. I mean, that is just an incredible day for Tampa Bay. So if you've got picks in round 2, you are going to be quidsing with it. This is where the strength of the draft is going to be. And it would not surprise me if the Seahawks traded Earl Thomas, admitted they're not going to re-sign him next year, and for losing him for 1 more year, if they could get another second round, they will do it.
Yeah, and you stole the follow-up out of my mouth, which was, with the idea of Earl Thomas still being on the Seahawks, and I said that they couldn't get into the second round or likely wouldn't, but obviously with Earl Thomas, perhaps they could. There's no guarantee that a team will trade a second-round pick for Earl Thomas. There's no guarantee that that any team will trade a day 2 pick for Earl Thomas. We don't know exactly what's out there, but in the scenario where they do trade Earl Thomas, or they feel they can't retain him, or that they won't get enough out of him in 2018. What do you see if they were into the second round? Let's say that the thing that everyone talks about with pick 50 with the Dallas Cowboys. Where would you see the Seahawks going at free safety next year? Do you see any prospects in the draft at the day 2 sort of selections that would be able to be a nice player that they would build around, or would you see it being Delano Hill or Tedrick Thompson or some other option?
I think if you trade Earl Thomas, you do that with the feeling that you already have an option on the roster, whether it's Bradley McDougall, whether it's Tedrick Thompson. I don't think it would be strange to trade Earl Thomas for number 50 and then just turn that around and draft Justin Reed, for example, or Jesse Bates the third. That would be a slightly strange move for me. So I think you only do it if you feel like you've got the free safety on the roster already. And I think Bradley McDougall would probably be that guy. And then at strong safety, it would be Thompson, Hill, Cam Chancellor if he somehow recovers and ends up playing this year. And then maybe on day 3, you look at a Cam Kelly, or you look at Latrell Jameson to come in. Jameson's obviously got the speed to come and play free safety for Seattle, a 4.40 speed. So you can imagine something like that happening there. And then you're just having to accept, everybody loves Earl Thomas. Every Seahawks fan loves Earl Thomas. Nobody wants to see Earl Thomas traded, really, I don't think. I mean, even the ones who felt bad about the Dallas situation and him going there, come get me if you get an opportunity. I don't think people really are desperate to see him depart the Seahawks. But this is the way that I look at it right now, is if they feel like they just cannot re-sign him, that they are not going to give this guy a third contract, that they don't trust the injury situation, they don't want to make him the highest paid safety in the league, they are going to either do one of two things: have him in 2018 and then let him walk as a free agent, or they're going to trade him now. Then I can understand why you would trade him now, lose a year of Earl Thomas, but get a player at 50 who's going to be with you on a cheap deal for the next 4 years. And potentially another pick, whether that's a third rounder or a fourth rounder on top of that, or a pick next year, for example, maybe a second rounder next year or a third rounder next year to sweeten the deal. That you're actually looking about the long-term future there, which is what the Seahawks have been doing when they moved Michael Bennett, they moved Richard Sherman. They're thinking about the future now. And I could see something like that. And then if you're at number 50, you're back in the race for, whether you wanted if you wanted a tight end like Ian Thomas, you could get that, or Dallas Goedert. If you wanted Isaiah Oliver might be there. Perhaps you look at defensive line in that range there, and Maurice Hurst or Josh Sweat or Kamoko Toure or somebody like that. Or Christian Kirk. I mean, there will be some great options there. You get a great pick, and I think there's a very good chance that you will get a player that would be a future core player at a vital position. So I can imagine why that would happen. I'm not saying it would necessarily be the right thing to do. Maybe they should pay Earl Thomas. We'll find out in 3 or 4 years whether it was the right thing to pay Earl Thomas or not. But I can see why they might move him. And Dallas are on the clock now. Time's ticking away. Do you want to make a move or not? There's no chance of a first rounder now in this year's draft because they're all gone. And I don't think you're looking at next year's draft and say, well, we'll take a first rounder there. It's second rounder now. So if you're in this draft, if a safety is what you're after, then someone's going to have to pull the trigger. It would have helped the Seahawks a little bit more, I think, if Justin Reed and Jesse Bates had gone off the board in the back end of the first round, because then teams who want a safety and have not got many alternatives, and maybe you get a bidding war there. As things stand, it looks like it's Dallas or Dallas. And if Jerry Jones is going to make the move, or is Jerry Jones not going to make the move? And it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. Remember, the Cowboys need a receiver, and they didn't take one in the first round. So they might feel like they've got to spend that second round pick there now.
And let's talk a little bit about the draft in general before getting back to the Seahawks and wrapping things up. Because we didn't talk this year during the first round at all. Going into, we'd speculated a lot on what would happen with the quarterbacks in the top of the first round and everything. So the Cleveland Browns come away with Baker Mayfield at 1 and Denzel Ward at 4. Ward, a surprise for a lot of people, perhaps, to go up that high. Maybe only 1 out of 30 mock drafts that I saw had Ward going 4, maybe 1 out of 50. And it's just very uncommon, but Ward goes number 4. And then the Browns have 2 of the next 3 picks. They're on the clock and they have 2 of the next 3 picks. So for how much better do you think Cleveland got today?
Cleveland, it's hard to say, because I don't mind Baker Mayfield first overall. I think he's a winner. I think he's competitive. I've never had an issue with his attitude, and the whole thing about grabbing his crotch and giving the finger to Kansas. I love that. The Kansas players started something with Baker Mayfield. They went into the center field. They wouldn't shake his hand. They were acting about and trying to intimidate him or send a message. And he just rammed it down the throat, absolutely hammered them, and then gave them a bit back. And look, that's just a competitor. It's the kind of thing that I think many people would do in that situation. Who wouldn't do that in a sporting environment? And we kind of say, oh, well, yeah, but if he's going to be an NFL quarterback, he's got to be boring. Well, no, sometimes I like that competitive fire. And all he's done is produce and put up stats and win in his college career. And, I think he showed a great... The game that stood out the 2 games stood out for me, but the one that really stands out is the Ohio State game, when Oklahoma went into Ohio State, beat them comfortably. Mayfield looked terrific. And that was the first time that you thought, hang on a minute, this guy's the real deal. He looks the part this year. And then in the game against Georgia in the Rose Bowl, he just kept them going and almost won that game. And against a really tough physical SEC team. And I think it really stood out. And he lost the Rose Bowl. Russell Wilson lost the Rose Bowl when he was at Wisconsin in his final year. I just think that for someone who has watched Wilson, I'm not saying that Wilson and Mayfield are completely the same players, because they're not. Wilson is much more mobile, much more of a running threat. But having witnessed Wilson perform the way he has in Seattle, I cannot wait to see Baker Mayfield playing for the Browns, and it's exciting. And Cleveland needs excitement, and they thought they were going to get it with Johnny Manziel, and they didn't. Let's hope that Baker Mayfield is going to provide that excitement. And I like the pick. And as for Denzel Ward, they needed a cornerback. They obviously didn't feel confident trading down. Personally, I don't think Denzel Ward's the best cornerback in this draft. And I think that Bradley Chubb probably would have been a better pick there. But they made that move. And listen, the Cleveland Browns have been one of the most miserable, boring franchises for my time following the NFL. And next year, people are going to want to watch them play. They're going to be interested. And I think that is a major positive.
And how do you make those next two picks? How do you think who are the guys on the board that would really excite you for Cleveland, even to another degree?
Well, I mean, they don't have a left tackle currently, so you would imagine that would have to be something they would consider. So are they going to look at someone like Jerron Christian, possibly from Louisville, the left tackle there? Are they going to look at Tyrell Crosby, who I think is better at the right tackle or guard than the left tackle, but they may look at him. Personally, I'd love to see them go after someone like Austin Corbett and give him a chance to play at left tackle and show that he can't do it, because I think he played so well there for Nevada that it's worth a shot. And the worst case scenario is you maybe get a right tackle or a guard out of it. So I think that could be an option for them. They've got running backs that they could look at. The likes of Ronald Jones II could be a perfect complement to Carlos Hyde, Nick Chubb, and they've taken a cornerback now, so that's probably going to take that off the board. I know people Yorks and Earl Thomas, and whether or not they would give Seattle an early second round pick for Earl or 64 or something like that, or a package of picks. But they did trade for Randall from Green Bay and free safety, so I'm not sure it's worth that. So there are some good options there, and they could go defensive line quite easily. They could take someone like Maurice Hurst if they want to rush from the inside. They could take Harold Landry to play the edge across from Myles Garrett. So there's plenty of options there for them. So they've set themselves up nice with these 2 picks now, and 64 to come if they keep that as well. So they're in a good position.
Looking at the offensive linemen, because obviously Seahawks fans, we're always looking at offensive linemen. So looking at the offensive linemen in the first round, and we've talked a lot on this podcast about the lack of talent in that area over years and years of just draining talent from the offensive line that moves over to the defensive line, or maybe they thin up and play tight end or something like that. But the talent at offensive line just gets worse and worse. And seeing that this year, we know that Quentin Nelson was graded out by many as one of the best offensive line prospects of the 2000s. But after that, just 4 other offensive linemen go off the board, including 5 other offensive linemen go off the board. Mike McGlinchey, who goes to the rivals, the 49ers, a tackle. Colton Miller going to the Raiders at 15. Frank Ragnow going to the Lions at 20. Billy Price going to the Bengals at 21. And Isaiah Wynn going to the New England Patriots at 23. And even with Wynn, who I think everyone thinks is a really great offensive line prospect, but one that is debatable between whether or not he's a tackler or guard after, the Patriots select him. And it's like, well, is he there to play tackle? Everyone thought that he was sort of more of a guard because of his size. So when you look at the offensive linemen off the board in this first round, and all of them, 3 of them going after the Seahawks had traded down, and you talked about the Seahawks trading down, but did you feel that any of these players are going to be mistake picks for those teams, or any of them that will be, work out really well?
Not surprised that Colton Miller and Mike McGlinchey went in the top 10. They were the 2 tackles you expected. Sorry, not top 10, top 20. Those are the 2 tackles you expected to go early. They had the most upside. They're most like the conventional NFL tackles, big, tall, long, started left tackle. Colton Miller had fairly average tape, but has got a physical profile to play like Lane Johnson. But that was possibly how teams viewed him, that he's got that potential to do that and be that type of player. So understandable why those 2 went in the top 20, but didn't really cover either of them for the Seahawks. I think the Niners taking McGlinchey at number 9 possibly screwed the Seahawks. If maybe they'd taken Tremaine Edmonds instead, as many people expected. Oakland then takes McGlinchey at 10 rather than trading down to 15 and taking Colton Miller. Colton Miller possibly lasts to number 18. And then the Seahawks trade down with Cleveland, as many expected, and get 33 and 35, which would be a much better position to be in right now. Preparing to take Rashaad Penny, at maybe number 33 and then still having the number 35 pick, as opposed to already having him with 27 and not picking again for another 50 picks is what it's going to be unless they trade Earl Thomas. So that one probably screwed the Seahawks. I will say this though, that I didn't have a negative in Colton Miller, but I personally felt that Isaiah Wynn was the best left tackle in college in 2017 that was eligible for this draft. And I thought Austin Corbett was the second best left tackle. They're both going to project to inside. New England might try Isaiah Wynn at left tackle, and I hope they give him the chance to do that because he was superb at left tackle for Georgia. I'd love to see him get a chance at left tackle, replacing Nate Solder, but he was projected to move inside to guard. Austin Corbett's going to do the same. But I love Isaiah Wynn. I think he's one of the top 15 players in this draft. Great. New England had a fantastic first day. In terms of Ragnow and Price, I felt they were both top 50 players. I've always felt that going back to my first top 50 rankings during the college season. Both very similar in terms of physical, tough, hard-nosed. Just plug them in there, solid players for the next decade at an increasingly more important position center in the modern NFL. I think Price has got the edge in terms of athleticism and upside. Ragnow's more in control. Price sometimes gets himself into trouble because he's just that little bit too aggressive. He's got more controlled aggression, but I think they're both really good players, good picks.
And for the Seahawks, they have to take into consideration the NFC West. Luckily for them, the Rams aren't picking. They weren't picking today, and they've got a while to wait until their first pick. But the Arizona Cardinals, as you mentioned, do trade up for Josh Rosen at pick 10. They've got Sam Bradford as a starter right there, and obviously Rosen won't be far behind. So, what are your thoughts on Josh Rosen getting added into the mix for the NFC West, where now it's like a quartet of Russell Wilson, Jared Goff, Jimmy Garoppolo, and Josh Rosen? Did you think that was a move and a quarterback that'll fit well with the Arizona Cardinals and perhaps be starting sooner rather than later?
Well, potentially. I mean, obviously Sam Bradford has a tendency to get hurt. Mike Glennon's the other quarterback there. Hasn't really shown much since going to Chicago and lost the job at Tampa Bay before they drafted Jameis Winston. So you would feel that there's perhaps a chance that mid-season next year or next season, Josh Rosen could be the starter. The only problem is that Josh Rosen is also an injury risk and gets banged up and misses time, and that would be a concern there. I think I would look at this deal in two ways. One, you have to give Arizona a little bit of respect. They traded up to get a quarterback and didn't give away a first-round pick. Last year, Houston had to give up a future first-rounder to go and get Deshaun Watson. Kansas City had to give up a future first-rounder to go and get Patrick Mahomes. If Arizona looked at Josh Rosen and said, yep, we can win with this guy, this is the guy that we want to build our future around, to do that and only give up a third-round pick this year is, you have to say, look, fair play to them. They got the deal done, and that's work for them. The other way I would look at it, though, is I would rather face Josh Rosen twice a year than Lamar Jackson. Jackson is not the prototype. I think that Rosen has got more of the conventional style of play. That there's a little bit of Matt Ryan to his play as well, and he's a good quarterback. He's the most natural passing quarterback, the most natural passer of the group. But there's just something about Lamar Jackson that is going to be really tough to defend. His ability as a runner, his creativity, his dynamism. I would have been a little bit more fearful if Arizona had got a bit more creative and had drafted Lamar Jackson than I would be if they're going to face Josh Rosen behind a really bad offensive line. He's going to lose Larry Fitzgerald probably after this season, and he's going to be relying a lot on David Johnson. I'm just not sure that is. I don't think it's the best fit for Josh Rosen. I think if Rosen had gone to a different team, that he had a better chance of succeeding. I'm not sure it's the best fit for him. That said, I do like Rosen. I think he's a good player. And even if they're an NFC West rival, it is going to be interesting to see how his career unfolds in Arizona.
And the other NFC rivals, or teams that the Seahawks have to be concerned about if they, are going to be successful next year and more moving forward other years. You mentioned DJ Moore, and we mentioned them and Calvin Ridley in those picks that went before Rashaad Penny. DJ Moore going to the Panthers, Calvin Ridley going to the Falcons. Moving down a little bit further, we see Mike Hughes, the cornerback, going to the Minnesota Vikings, and then the Philadelphia Eagles traded out of the first round. That's where Lamar Jackson went to the Ravens. So for, facing off a receiver like DJ Moore, if you're facing the Panthers, or Calvin Ridley or the Falcons, or a cornerback like Mike Hughes for the Vikings, did you see any of those as being really good value that could be really explosive picks for those teams?
Well, Mike Hughes, I like him. Certainly like what he could be. And when you watch UCF, I didn't think that he was a player that would necessarily fit the Seahawks, but there's definitely something there. I mean, he's gritty, he covers well, he does an awful lot of the things that you like. And I think Minnesota as a team, like I said, he's not a fit for the Seahawks because of the arm length and the style of play and the fact they don't take quarterbacks early. But for Minnesota, I think with Mike Zimmer there, he's done a fantastic job building up that defense. They've already got one really good corner in Xavier Rhodes. Now they've got another one in Mike Hughes to play across from him. I'm interested to see what he can do. I think of the cornerbacks that went in the first round, I like Alexander, who went to Green Bay. I think Denzel Ward has got the athletic potential, but I'm not quite sold on him as a top 5 pick. But I think that Hughes has got a real chance to make it.
So I think that can pretty much wrap up our first round podcast reaction to the Seattle Seahawks, and certainly they gave us something interesting to talk about today by moving down. And skilled players were not going off the board at all in this draft. Just one in the top 23, that being Saquon Barkley. And then after DJ Moore went to the Carolina Panthers, we did have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 skill players go off the board at the end of the first round, and Rashaad Penny being one of them. So the Seahawks, they do trade down. They do pick up a 3rd round pick. They do, address the running game and select Rashaad Penny. Obviously I still would not, suggest that I have changed my mind. It's weird because after a move like this happens, people on Twitter go like, "Oh, LOL," like, what do you think about taking a running back now? Well, I still think the same. I don't change my feelings based on the whims of what the Seattle Seahawks choose to do. We disagree on certain things, and that's fine. It's not gonna make me feel sad about it and or like change things. It's just, okay, well, they took him. If you are going to take a running back in the first round, I'm glad that they did it at the end of the first round, and I'm glad that they picked up a 3rd rounder in doing it. Certainly picking Rashaad Penny at 18 is much different than picking him at 27 and not getting that 3rd rounder and not and not doing it quite as high. So, at this point, they have him now, and they add a running back, and they needed to do better in running the football. I don't know necessarily that it is the pick that I, would have made. Well, I know that it wasn't, but, I'm not saying that it's not going to work out. I'm very excited about the idea of adding someone to the Seattle Seahawks that will be good. Nobody would ever disagree with that, that you want your team to add good players. I want the Seahawks to have Johnny Hekker. I mean, I would love for the Seahawks to have Johnny Hekker. Would I draft Johnny Hekker in the first round? No, I wouldn't draft Johnny Hekker in the first round. There's certain things where you have to take positional value into account. And so for me personally, that's where I stand on the issue. And I know, Rob, you stand on a different side of the issue. But I will say that, it doesn't mean that I'm not also excited to see Rashaad Penny play for the Seattle Seahawks. I think if you're going to put a player in that sort of hierarchy where he's going to be a 1st round pick and he's the 2nd running back off the board, and and some people like him as much as Saquon Barkley, that's really interesting. Also, maybe another great sign for Saquon Barkley, I guess, if they did end up the same, but I don't think that's we'll see what happens. But as far as how I feel at the end of the day for the Seattle Seahawks, I feel, okay, if in the first round they had picked a guard at 18, I probably wouldn't be as excited as I am for them to have Rashaad Penny in a 3rd round pick. I would have been pretty underwhelmed. So in the sense of adding a player who could do very exciting things, I am excited, and that's how I feel at the end of day one. Rob, before we go, let me give you the opportunity to say how you feel at the end of day one.
Well, I'm interested to see how Rashaad Penny produces in Seattle. And as I mentioned earlier, I like the statement that we're going to fix the run, and this is our move to try and do that. That said, look, I mean, I don't mind the pick of a running back as others will do. I'm happy with that. for me, I think if you want to run the ball and you want that to be a focus and your identity, then taking a running back early that you really like I don't have an issue there. What I would say is that I think this goes back a few years now, and you look at the Seahawks drafts for 2 or 3 years, and you just have to wonder, have they sort of planned this properly, and have they struggled with handling the team that was ready to win now and having to build around, a very, very big, expensive core and trying to keep this thing and trying to get it over the top to win another Super Bowl versus maybe starting to acknowledge that the churn should have happened a little bit earlier. And some of these picks, some of the decisions they've made, a year ago, they take Malik McDowell, and we talked a lot about him a year ago. Kenny, was that the best thing to do when there was obviously Kevin King there? They wouldn't need the cornerback now. If they'd taken Kevin King and Shaquille Griffin, then that position would be already sorted. They wouldn't have to be worrying about that. If they'd have taken TJ Watt, they wouldn't necessarily need the edge rusher that they need now. If they'd have taken Cam Robinson, like a lot of people wanted, they might necessarily need to trade for Dwayne Brown. If they wanted to run the ball specifically, why didn't they try and rebuild it properly instead of trying fudging it a little bit? Believing that Thomas Rawls was the answer and then just taking CJ Procise in the 3rd round. When you see someone like Minnesota that trades down and goes and gets Dalvin Cook, there are lots of things, and I'm not necessarily talking about players. I didn't really like Cam Robinson. I didn't think they were going to draft Dalvin Cook. He wasn't quite as explosive as they liked. I'm not throwing these names out saying with hindsight we said all this and they should have done this, that, and the other. It's just that, to me, I just feel like the structure and the plan of their drafts these last few years haven't really been there. And as much as I understand that, or as much as I like the statement that they make with this running game, that Rashaad, we're going to take Penny, we're going to try and run the ball better, I am on board with that. But I also say this, the pressure's on now. You've made your move. You have to run the ball better next year. There's no excuses now. You've spent a 1st-round pick on a running back, and you spent a 1st-round pick on a running back that people didn't expect to be the 2nd off the board after Saquon. Other people were, if they take Penny, they can't run the ball, and Nick Chubb has a Rookie of the Year season next year, you know what the reaction's going to be? Or if Ronald Jones II looks like Alvin Kamara, or if Darius Geis is one of the leading rushers and goes in the 2nd or the 3rd round, you know what people's reaction's going to be now. So the pressure's on. They have to deliver. So I like the statement. I don't mind the pick. I don't hate the pick. I'm not crazy about it, but I don't dislike it. But they've got to run the ball better now. There can be no excuses. That has to be better in 2018. Otherwise, I'm not sure what kind of a conversation we're going to be having at the end of the 2018 season. If the Seahawks have another season like they've had for the last 2 years, or particularly what they had in 2017, and they can't run the ball after this move, then a lot of questions are going to be asked of Pete Carroll and John Schneider.
Yeah, they said they were going to run the ball better. They have certainly made a lot of changes. They have fired the offensive coordinator, fired the offensive line coach, got new guys there, changed, brought in a new offensive line coach, brought in a new right guard, drafted this running back in the 1st round, and are sort of moving towards that direction again, it would seem. So if they don't run the ball better, and if they don't play better on defense, obviously too, bigger changes may be ahead, and we'll see. So that's it for this episode of 3000 NFL Mock Drafts / Seahawks Chats with Kenneth Arthur and Rob Staten. You can check out Rob at SeahawksDraftBlog.com. He will have more great updates going on over there as the draft continues through the weekend. Of course, you can also get lots of great Seahawks content at fieldgoals.com. We've got at least 8 or 9 Rashaad Penny articles up already as is on fieldgoals.com. So please go check that out. And you can follow Rob on Twitter at Rob Staten, Staton, or us at Field Goals for more Seahawks type stuff. The Seattle Seahawks select Rashaad Penny, running back, San Diego State, 27th overall. They'll be picking again in the mid-70s. I think it's 76 with the trade that they made with the Green Bay Packers on Friday. So we'll see what happens there, and we'll see if Earl Thomas is indeed a Seahawk by the end of Friday, or if the Seahawks are making a different day 2 pick and he is a Dallas Cowboy. We will find out And then the Seahawks have a bunch of work to do on day 3 on Saturday. So we have plenty to cover. Keep listening to 3000 NFL Mock Draft. The new episode will be out pretty soon.